Super GT in the 2000s featured some of the most unhinged GT racers to ever grace a circuit. It wasn't enough that its top GT500 class was several seconds quicker than the big international GT1 cars, despite having 100 horsepower less than them. The lower GT300 category was home to some of the most peculiar vehicles to ever call themselves a GT race car. The rules were extremely loose and allowed teams to run pretty much anything they wanted, provided it's homologated. There were mid-engine Toyota Corollas, F1-powered Ford GTs, and 20B swapped RX-7s, running alongside a few GT staples like Porsche 911s. These cars deserve a video each. The most extreme of these vehicles, however, couldn't be anything other than the literal sports prototype known as the Mooncraft Shiden. This name applies to a pair of cars built 30 years apart, having little to do with each other besides designer, looking extremely cool, and their shared name. Let's cover both vehicles. To avoid confusion, the 1970s cars will be referred to with the year construction, while the 2006 GT300 reboot will simply be called Shiden. This video was envisioned long before Sam Collins' Shiden video, so enjoy two takes on the same idea. Mooncraft is Japan's other major race car constructor, though with a different focus than Dome. While Dome built many original race cars, Mooncraft was more of a coach builder, providing new aerodynamic bodywork to existing chassis. Founded by Takuya Yura in 1975, the company has had a significant presence in all types of Japanese motorsport, from formulas to sports cars. The company got its start by modifying foreign cars for Japan's Fuji Grand Champion series. This was Japan's top closed-wheel formula at the time, featuring 2-liter sports cars modified for the long straight of Fuji, the only circuit the championship ran at until the late 1980s. Fuji Grand Champion glory was the Shiden 77's goal. After assisting with the redesign of a championship-winning GRD S74 in 1976, Yura was commissioned by Ito Racing and Noritake Takahara, the 1975 and 1976 series champion, to design the bodywork for an original car for the series, with few ties to the imported groups of sports racers filling the grid. The imported cars weren't suited for smaller Japanese frames, and the Shiden design team had optimized the car better for Fuji. Yura named the car Shiden after the Kawanishi N1K Shiden World War II fighter plane. The race car's aerial namesake was able to challenge American fighters after a raft of improvements were applied to it late in the war. Yura's main goal with the Shiden 77 was to minimize drag. Therefore, the car had a closed cockpit, unlike most of its competition, to have airflow over the top side with as little interruption as possible. Shapes that are curved on top, yet flat on the bottom, to generate lift, a force that race car designers realized was the enemy about a decade prior. Therefore, numerous flaps were cut above the wheel wells, atop the engine cover, and even the roof to vent out high-pressure air, increasing downforce. Slats like these began appearing on sports cars sometime this decade, though rarely to the extent that the Shiden 77 had them. There were additional, smaller vents for cooling the brakes and driver on the front clip. As for the shape of the front clip itself, the large splitter-shaped section has an additional smaller lip running across the edge that leads out to the lot. It seems like it would be a high-pressure area intended to keep the nose down at speed. The fenders themselves were gently rounded and curved inwards at the front to most likely direct air around the sides and away from the front wheels, slightly recessed to reduce drag. The sides feature large skirts and a prominent vent to cool the brakes. A vent on the greenhouse directly behind the cockpit provided cooling for the engine bay. For a design intended to reduce drag as much as possible, these cooling vents were rather large. There really wasn't much going on in the back besides a long tail with shades of 917 LH in its design. The Shiden 77 lacked the floor pan, so there isn't much to say about the underbody besides it generating a touch of extra drag. The round effect was just discovered in Formula 1 and hadn't spread beyond Lotus at the time, so the second part of the paradigm shift hadn't kicked into gear yet. A shame, as the massive overhang of the Shiden 77 provide plenty of space for diffusers. The wing was mounted low, atop fin-shaped struts that probably help with high-speed stability. Overall, there isn't too much to discuss about the Shiden 77 aerodynamically. It was a fairly conventional car intended to minimize drag. It never even saw the inside of a wind tunnel, so the area was entirely vibe-spaced. The 1970s were the Wild West when it came to race car aero, and Yura was a young man experimenting with race car design. The Shiden is quite elegant looking though. Equally conventional are the car's mechanical bits. A BMW M12-7 was initially mounted midships. This 2-liter 4-cylinder was found in BMW's touring cars of the era and was a popular choice for lower formulas and Group 6 sports racers. With its fuel injection and dual overhead cam valve train, the M12-7 was a state-of-the-art power plant for the 1970s. Years of development led to the iron block 4-cylinder producing over 300 naturally aspirated horsepower and revving to over 9,000 RPM. In the Grand Champion series, it and the Mazda 13B powered most of the field. The other eligible engines appeared to lack power compared to those two, which was a death sentence for high-speed circuits like Fuji. The Shiden would also run a Mazda 13B later in its life, and since I'm talking about engines already, why not go into the 13B specs? The 13B was Mazda's most successful rotary engine. Used in production cars from the 1970s to 2012, its compact, lightweight nature is great for lightweight race cars with unstressed engine mounting. Rotary engines anecdotally have a longer lifespan than traditional piston engines when used in race cars, so teams need to replace worn engines less frequently. These factors, plus Mazda parts being easier to acquire in Japan than BMW parts, led to the 13B powering half the grid in the Fuji Grand Champion series. The more or less 300 horsepower produced by either engine would be transmitted to the track with a 5-speed Hewlin FG400 transaxle, probably the most common racing gearbox of the 1970s. The car's chassis was a twin-tube aluminum monocoque with an aluminum roll cage attached to the cockpit and steel mounting plates for the suspension. It was built around Takahara's frame, but he found it a quite tight fit. Curiously, it was a single-seat design, unlike the two-seaters making up most of the grid. This was the most innovative part of the car, as the Grand Champion series would evolve into one based around V-body single-seaters in the coming years. The single, centrally located seat improved the driver's forward view. Back to the suspension, that was a double wishbone up front, with what seems to be a weird multi-link sub in the back. The Japanese website that's done a lot of heavy lifting for me in terms of research describes the rear suspension as a single upper link, parallel lower link, with upper and lower radius rods at the rear, with compact steel plate uprights. And finally, a car doesn't have pushrod double wishbones with coilovers at both ends. Although this is great for me not having to say the same thing each video and talking about suspension, it may or may not be worth for the Shiden 77's handling dynamics. This setup sounds a lot like what Lotus did for the groundbreaking 49 Grand Prix car, with the radius rods help blocking pitch motion. The upper and lower links probably are there to help with yaw and dive. You don't really see suspension setups like this very often these days, but race cars of the 1970s did all kinds of weird things with the rear suspension links. Tires came from Bridgestone. The car apparently weighed about 580 kilograms, or 1,278 pounds according to Autosport, which is roughly as much as the competition. Another source claimed it weighed more, which tracks with some of the info about the gimmick section. Lastly, Yura designed the livery, the iconic Garage Italia scheme, which is one of the few times that pink looks good on a race car. Overall, the Shiden was a thoroughly conventional car distinguished by its roof, a rare sight on small displacement sports cars like it. With the 3-time grand champion of the series and designers creating a car specifically for Fuji use, how well did the Shiden 77 fare in actual competition? I'll rip the band-aid off and tell you that the car underperformed. The car appeared for the first time in the inaugural 300-kilometer race in March 1977, but was just there to look pretty. The following race in April would be the Shiden 77's competition debut. After running as high as 6th place, Takuya retired the car with brake issues. Fuji was one of the last tracks you want to have those at, with the circuit only having heavy braking zones. This would be the Shiden 77's first and last race in its original form in the Grand Champion Series, as Takuya switched to a Chevron BMW while the Shiden crew brainstormed methods of improving the car, like removing the roof. The big glass windshield and heavy fiberglass bodywork led to a high center of gravity. This, plus the vibrodynamics and massive overhangs, led to an ill-handling car that lost all the time it gained on the straights and the couple of corners that Fuji had. I can't imagine how sketchy the car was around the final long right-hand sweeper before the match straight. The Shiden would race one more time in the Fuji Long Distance Series that year, finishing 7th place. The Shiden would not turn a wheel again in competition until 1978, where it sported a radically altered appearance. It's almost like it was an entirely new car. Oh wait, it was! The self-developed chassis was replaced by a more proven one from March, while Yura worked his magic again with the bodywork. It's unknown what happened to the original chassis. The front and rear bodywork was shortened to try to cut some weight, lower the moment of inertia, and reduce the amount of lift the car experienced at high speeds. A new rectangular gaping hole in the front end was filled with an oil cooler. The new rotary engine had increased cooling needs, and keeping the engine cool is a little more important than looking hard. A periscopic engine intake, common to rotary prototypes, is brought on the engine cover. The cockpit was also exposed to the elements, as the windshield tended to fog up when the car was a coupe. The new large oil cooler, situated about a foot from the windscreen, will make that problem worse if the cockpit stayed fully enclosed. Finally, the rear wing was now mounted on struts separate from the bodywork and located slightly higher. With these comprehensive modifications, the Shiden Kai would live to fight another day. Unfortunately, the Shiden Kai sucked about as much as the original car did, and Takatake abandoned it for a March Mazda with actual March bodywork. The revised Shiden concept was a compromise in negating all the car's original strengths. A young driver named Masanori Sekiya would take on the task of piloting the cast-off race car, only for the brakes to fail and Sekiya left the passenger on a thrill ride, high-speed Fuji barrier smash. Sekiya recovered, but the Shiden Kai was much less fortunate. The wreck completely destroyed the chassis, leaving the first domestically produced Grand Champion car only a memory. Sekiya would go on to have a long career in racing, even winning Le Mans, while Mooncraft would later dominate the Grand Champion Series with cars of its own design. Wait, Mr. Featherfin, if both OG Shidens were destroyed or vanished, how come you have modern-looking footage of the car driving around? Do you have a time machine you've been hiding from us and chose to use a seemingly random race car video to help reveal it? No. What does exist, on the other hand, is a pair of Shiden replicas built in the 21st century from the original molds. The first film was constructed by Takuya of the Madhouse Tuning Company, not the animation studio, and founded the K4GP, a series that we'll mention soon enough. A close friend of Yura's, he acquired the Shiden 77's bodywork molds when Mooncraft was doing some spring cleaning near the turn of the century. The bodywork will be plopped on top of the West FJ 1600 chassis, ensuring lightweight and probably a third of the performance of the original car, as the FJ 1600 engine only made about 110 horsepower. The car was completed in time for the inaugural GT21 race in 2002 at Fuji Speedway, the car's only stomping grounds. I have no idea what happened to this replica, but I do know Sugiyama-san is no longer with us, so Yura managed to get the molds back from his estate in a pretty rough state. Yura would use these molds to construct the Shiden replica on top of West V-Base-7 retro border sports car chassis, but he had to do some custom fabrication to get the chassis to fit the car's proportions correctly. Since this was the 21st century, the replica could benefit from modern materials since construction, or polycarbonate windows, fixing some of the weight issues that the original car suffered from. Yura even gave it an under tray. This replica would be powered by Toyota 4AGE, outfitted with a dry sump and enough tuning to reach 180 horsepower, and has provided the bulk of the Shiden 77 footage you've seen today. This Shiden replica appears to be slightly slower than a GT4 car, as it ran at 216 around Suzuka during a shakedown. Now here's the part you're probably waiting for. The story of the Shiden MCRT16 GT300. This is a longer and much less depressing story. Kazuho Takahashi was owner-driver of the racing team Cars Tokai Dream 28, a frequent competitor in the lower classes of high-level Japanese GT racing. Over the years, the team ran an array of eclectic machinery like D2 GT500 NSX GTs, and an obscure sports car called the VMAG RDG20R, which is another car I really want to talk about. Takahashi announced at the end of 2005 that he'd bring something that would shock the paddock for the following season, and the new for 2006 Shiden machine did not adequate job of that. The groundwork for the new machine was laid sometime in 2005, when Takuya Yura envisioned a new high-performance sports car based around the Daytona prototype. Daytona prototypes were Grand Am's answer to a question that few saw the point in asking at the time. How do you make a safe, competitive, sustainably priced prototype racing class? Notice that none of the important factors were speed or technology, aka the things that your traditional prototype race car pursued above everything else. Daytona prototypes were tube chassis racers that kind of resembled an IMSA GTP seen from a funhouse mirror. Many racing fans consider Daytona prototypes aesthetically challenging, but they offered safe and sturdy construction, so Yura believed that one would make a great base for a high-performance sports car. Takahashi caught wind of this and considered converting the new Mooncraft sports car into a racing vehicle to promote the run of limited production Shidens that were totally going to be sold. Those never existed, as the Super GT organizers granted the Shiden a way to run without ever building road versions. How was the Shiden even allowed to run in a GT class without a road car? GT300 was and is made up of several different rule sets balanced to run around the same performance. There are categories for imported GT cars and domestically built machines, as well as a miscellaneous category for anything that doesn't fit within those rules. The Shiden was fit under the miscellaneous group as it was intended for low-volume sports cars of the type that appeared in natural GT grids at the time, like Gilets and Moslers. The Shiden was allowed to run because it previewed a future sports car from Mooncraft that did not need to exist at the time of homologation. Judging from the press release, the road Shiden wouldn't be too dissimilar from the race version, featuring the same adjustable suspension and chassis construction. pricing was never finalized. I doubt the Shiden road version would have been cheap. There's little space for sound deadening on Daytona prototype chassis, and the hole would need to be cut in the firewall into the rear window as well. A hypothetical road Shiden probably would have handled quite well, but would have been a pain to live with thanks to its size and noise. The MC RT16 started life as the Gamesco Riley Mark 11 Chassis 16, which ended its first life in a wall at Long Beach. After all, the name hints at the chassis' origin. However, the Shiden was ready in February 2006, while the apparent donor car wrecked in April. Perhaps Chassis 16 was a backup, while the one that became the Shiden came from elsewhere using the same number. I'll just go with what the official Daytona prototype book said, even though the timeline doesn't match up. The Shiden received numerous changes from its Daytona prototype origins to render it suitable for the Crucible GT300 competition. Mooncraft and Riley worked together to rework the DP's old chassis into something more suitable for Japanese GT racing. Takahashi was not a professional driver, so ease of driving was one of the most important considerations in the Shiden's design. He also wanted to race in a stylish vehicle, which shades of the Le Mans prototype in its looks, citing the Bentley Speed 8 and Toyota TS020 as inspiration. Mooncraft chose Riley as a chassis partner after observing the cars in action at Daytona 24 Hours. Riley's handled better and had a more straightforward construction than the other chassis. Only a few parts of the frame, as well as the impact structures, remain unmodified from the original car. The first thing to go would be the Pontiac power plant. General Motors V8 would be perfect for the job if their parts were as plentiful in Japan as they are in the USA. Although the GM V8 is dead simple to work on and would have made a 300-ish horsepower Powerwell GT300 all day, Mooncraft and Company decided to use a Toyota 1UZ FE V8 tuned by Toyota Racing instead. Curiously, the 1UZ's successor engine, the 3UZ FE, was a legal engine in Grand Am. Why the 1UZ FE? They wanted something torquey and reliable, since the power numbers of Child's Play a hit. They can also use the standard production engine's catalytic converter, but no modification. They could have used a Honda V6 of some sort since, cars took a Dream 28 as a Honda dealer, but that would require more modification and higher engine stresses than the Toyota V8 would have had. Porsche's Flat 6 was also considered, but was nixed for the spare parts issue. Also, wouldn't using the Porsche engine be expensive regardless? The road Shiden was intended to have around 480 horsepower, but for GT300 competition, the 1UZ FE would breathe through a straw, sporting air restrictions around 27mm or less for most of its life. Since the engine didn't have to make much power, it had a shockingly low redline for a modern naturally aspirated race car. Peak power was said to come at about 5,300 RPM, and the car doesn't sound like it goes much above 6,000 from the live footage of it. Curiously, the Shiden runs a flat plane crankshaft despite the lack of revs to choke down to the mill. Perhaps they wanted every bit of responsiveness from the engine? Peak torque was somewhere in the range of 290 pound-feet. Actual power figures were never disclosed for the Shiden, so we have to rely on the numbers officially given by Super GT, which I doubt are 100% reliable. It's also sort of poetic how both the Shiden 77 and MCRT16 make around the same horsepower. What's considerably less legal in Grand Am is the Shiden's bodywork, aka Yura's claim to fame. Yura wanted the car to be as easy to drive as possible, so he focused on creating a wide operational window aerodynamically. He could have made the Shiden even more aerodynamically radical, but didn't want the car to be annoying for Takahashi to drive, as he was an amateur, after all. According to Sam Collins's video about the car, the Shiden was much more aerodynamically efficient than the base Riley, but didn't reveal to him any numbers. Racing On claims that it makes over a ton of downforce, but neglected to mention the speed that it was developed at. I'll assume that it's somewhere around 150 miles per hour, so the car may produce as much aero load as the modern GT3 car. Drag values weren't given, but they're reportedly lower in the competition. Yura was inspired by the bonito fish, or Katsurodus pelamis, as he pinned the flowing lines of the Shiden. He claims it's one of the most streamlined shapes in nature, and honestly, I see where he's coming from. Bonito, like most other scombroid, tuna, mackerel, etc. fishes, are loudly compressed and fusiform in shape. The fins are relatively small and falcate, or sickle-shaped, and the fish features a scombroid signature row of dorsal finlets running down the top of the caudal peduncle. Perhaps those finlets act as vortex generators to speed up the laminar water flow running down the fish, reducing drag. As active pelagic predators, scombroid fishes need as little water resistance as possible to save energy as they pursue their quarry across the open oceans. Bonito are on the smaller side of the scombroids, so they don't need to have as much muscle to propel them forward, leading to a much more streamlined shape. As for the most streamlined aquatic shape in nature, I wonder how well Gastrobyzantine hillstream loaches compare. They're even more relevant to the world of race cars since their shape probably produces real downforce. With their flat bottoms, wedge-shaped head, and teardrop shape, they likely have an even smaller frontal area than the bonito. Hillstream loaches even have ridges underneath the head to let water in their mouths, bypassing the body sucker. Sounds like a front to future, doesn't it? All this together allowed the Tuelia hillstream loach to drag 4 times their weight of a simulated waterfall. That 2006 Canadian paper I referenced in 2 of the Beyond the Clear Walls videos feels sort of incomplete without mention of the group, but hillstream loaches weren't as common in the aquarium hobby in the mid-2000s. Wait, this is a race car video. The Shiden looks like a hillstream loach if you squint. They have similar proportions? Anyway, Grand Am had several strict laws constructors had to design their cars around, and feared the cars going too fast around the Daytona Oval and killing another driver like the SRP predecessor did. The most obvious one is the massive greenhouse or cockpit in the area directly behind it. This is to allow for extra space for a taller roll cage, increasing rollover protection. The Shiden's greenhouse has been shrunken compared to the base Riley, now much more teardrop shaped and resembling the aforementioned loaches proportionally. With 300-ish horsepower and no Gara, not the fish, reading down their neck, they need to take the drag reduction. The car's engine now breathes through an intake atop the cockpit, which is also where the engine's air restrictors are located. Grand Am would eventually shrink the greenhouses to about the Shiden's size for the 3rd and last generation cars, as they likely grew tired of the cars being constantly roasted for their appearance. The front bulkhead of a Daytona prototype also had mandated minimum height. This increased drag, downforce, and visual ungainliness. Unlike the greenhouse, the tall front bulkhead couldn't be shortened, so the Shiden had a pretty stubby nose. Lengthening the front end to accommodate a big front splitter would have been a decent call if the car wasn't mandated to make as little horsepower as it did. That would lead to too much drag, so the front splitter appears to be shorter and thinner than that of the Mark 11. Dive flames rest in their usual position in front of the wheel wells. Behind them are a pair of gill-like vents that void high-pressure air from the wheel wells and splitter. A large carbon fiber side impact structure inherited from the Daytona prototype rest where post-front wheel well vents would normally go, so the splitter and wheel well's air needs to be exhausted elsewhere. The Grand Am inherited impact structures make the Shiden the best car to have when the driver is on the receiving end of morally hazardous behavior from other drivers. The diveplane's location seems to feed energized air towards the upper vent, increasing its effectiveness. Curiously, the post-front wheel well vents you find on most other high-downforce sports cars are located in a similar place to the distal edge of a Hillstream Lotus pectoral fins. More typical-ish fender vents appear on the interface of the wheel well in later seasons. Shades of Shiden 77, perhaps. Like all Daytona prototypes, the radiator rests at the front, sending hot, higher pressure air over the car's upper surface. My reprieve from push-rod double wishbone suspension at both sides has ended, as that's what keeps the Shiden GT300 off the ground. Mooncraft kept the Riley specialty: separated springs and dampers for easier adjustment of one value without affecting the other. The suspension geometry was designed to have anti-squat properties that keep the aerodynamic platform stable and handling predictable. The Shiden sides are slightly less lab-shaped than those of the Riley, as they possess a little groove near the bottom. A vent shows up near the end 3/4 to generate a vortex that helps evacuate air from the rear wheel arches. Besides the groove, no other adornments or sculpting mark the car's flanks besides the NACA ductor rear brake ventilation. Despite both cars sharing flanks flatter than a flounder, the Shidens are lower and slope downwards. The shape is again limited by the boxy spray spring chassis with 4 different impact protection zones. Safety first, after all. The downward slope continues to the car's rear, which curves upwards and is fenced by a small gurney. Canard-shaped flaps also run the length of the car's rear overhang. The rear also houses 2 other significant differences from the base Riley: a diffuser and a custom-built rear wing with deep end plates. Daytona prototypes were banned from running diffusers until the unification of American endurance racing, and were mandated to use the same Crawford-designed wing with small end plates. Parity was important after all. The Shiden single-element rear wing is mounted lower than that of the Rileys, and has a larger chord, giving it more area to do its thing. Over the Shiden's lifespan, it ran 3 different end plate styles. The initial version with end plates connecting to the bodywork, a presumably medium drag version with a cutout at the leading edge and not extending downwards as far, and the low drag wing featuring tiny end plates. The cutouts are there to speed up flow and reduce the end plate surface area. It also allows high pressure air to spill off the sides and more directly onto the wing surface itself, reducing drag and increasing efficiency a bit. The diffuser is a shallow device with an additional strake either side of the car's midpoint. The Shiden's longitudinally mounted gearbox ate into some of the space the diffuser could take up. It was probably more intended to clean up the airflow from the rear than produce tons of downforce, even though a rear-biased aero platform is nice and stable at high speeds. On both sides of the diffuser, the bodywork curves upwards in a wing-shaped profile to squeeze out that tiny bit more aero-based suction. Despite having the rear diffuser, the underbody ahead of it is the same as that of the Riley, that is, a flat bottom. No one else has a flat bottom? You're Hillstream Lotus, as well as most other vintage fishes. Flat bottoms offer a large surface for the air rushing under the car to work on, especially if it runs a significant level of rake and sits low to the ground. Relying on the floor too much for aero leads to a more difficult car to set up, so I doubt the flat bottom was a major focus in the setup, at least initially. Overall, most of the aero gains over the Riley appear to be in its frontal area and skirting around some of the Grand Am mandated design choices. Tires and gearing are other places that the Shiden diverges from the donor car. Daytona prototypes always ran a spec tire, be it Hoosier or Continental. Since the tires are made for Grand Am only, there's little need to push for anything besides cost effectiveness and machine parity. Meanwhile, GT300 has had a serious tire war raging since 1994, and practically every major tire brand has thrown their rubber into the arena. Noticeably, none of these brands were Continental or Hoosier. Cars Tokai chose Yokohama for the Shiden. Curiously, these tires may have been equally sized in all four corners with 280mm tread width, which was the max allowed, according to the Super GT website, though the initial press release for the hypothetical road car stated otherwise. Yura intended for the Phantom road car to run 255mm tires up front and 290 at the rear instead. Tokai had been loyal to Yokohama since they started racing, and Yokohama-shod cars consistently fought for the top spots on the podium. As for the gearbox, the Shiden ran an extra gear over the 5-speed Riley, as the X-Track transaxle was designed for 5 and 6-speed applications. With the less than 300 pound-feet of torque running through the overbuilt gearbox, it would last a lifetime. To save weight, the Shiden's transmission case is made of magnesium, freeing a reported 15 kilograms, which should end up being just ballast anyway. All this combined led to about 950 kilograms of Shiden, according to Racing On magazine, which would balance it up to at least 1100 kilograms for competition. The base Mark 11 weighed about 1000 kilograms depending on the engine choice. Why the excess weight? Super GT rules at the time appeared to mandate that cars weigh at least 1100 kilograms. Overall, the new Shiden is about as conservative design-wise for the era it raced in as its predecessor. Most of the innovation in the MC RT16 is convincing the GTA to let it run and making a Generation 1 Daytona prototype look unambiguously pretty. Although none were ever built, the Shiden was always intended to spawn customer cars, so why have people paid to run a car that's not user-friendly? Unlike its distant ancestor, the Shiden is a quite effective race car, as we will find out pretty soon. But first, let's take a small detour. Yura is a creative man, and he wasn't going to let a good name go to waste. The Shiden would spawn 2 child projects, the less creatively named Ko-Shiden and Ko-Shiden R. Ko in Japanese means child, and these 2 cars were definitely diminutive. The Road Ko-Shiden is the closest thing we've gotten to a Shiden road car, though sharing little other than styling cues with its bigger counterpart. Like its bigger brother, the chassis would not be constructed entirely by Mooncraft proper. The Ko-Shiden's chassis donor would be considerably more pedestrian than its parents. A late model Suzuki Alto donated its bones to the cause. Yura's goal for the Ko-Shiden was maximum small or front-wheel drive performance, and he mentioned on his blog that the Alto's engine had plenty of overhead for extra power beyond the federally mandated 63 wheezing horses that all K cars claimed. Yura's finished FRP sculpture would resemble a modern Japanese interpretation of one of the 1960s Panhard Le Mans cars. Both the Panhards and Ko-Shidens were low displacement, low drag front wheel drives shaped like big blue tadpoles. The Ko-Shiden R has considerably less known about it, but its construction is entirely different. It uses a chassis, suspension, and brakes from West JK96 Formula 4 with a roll cage and side impact structures for added reinforcement. Its body is also made of fiber reinforced plastic like its sister car. Like the actual Shiden, the Ko-Shiden R has a mid-mounted power plant. From onboard sounds, it has a turbo 3-cylinder, probably that aforementioned Alto motor, and the 4-speed H-pattern manual transmission. Down the backstretch of Fuji, it can reach 127 miles an hour, or 205 kilometers per hour, implying a low power output, which I guess is around 110 horsepower. Despite its lack of power, the Ko-Shiden R has decent cornering speeds thanks to a functional wing and splitter. Both cars participated in the K4 GP series meant for K cars in the 2000s and 2010s. Several hundred miles away in Europe, the seeds of the class that will eventually grow to engulf international GT racing were being planted. GT3 cars were testing at Paul Ricard at the time the Shiden was being designed. GT3 was Stefan Rattel's latest idea to provide relatively affordable GT racing for his rich playboy friends. Rattel noticed that there were several one-make cup series with similar performance moving around Europe, and figured that it would be better for all the manufacturers involved to merge them into one big category. Fair racing would be ensured with a revolutionary balance and performance system for each car, not to be confused with the success balance used in Super GT or the sliding power to weight scales used in other series. Each car would have its weight, power, fuel flow, as well as other parameters modified to ensure close racing amongst vastly different cars. Furthermore, each car had to be homologated, greatly reducing the in-season development so common in racing at the time. Lastly, GT3s were pushable from the manufacturer ready to race, saving the customer time and money developing the car. GT3 can be seen as the Bizarro World GT300 in some respects. Both categories aim to provide close racing with a loose rule set, but one was geared towards tuners and teams that like building their own vehicles, while the other is better for rich people who just want to race. Japan had a healthy at the time scene of aftermarket tuners and boutique teams using the most popular series in the country as a marketplace to sell their wares. Despite its purpose-built nature, the Shiden, along with the two other GT300 prototypes, which were DSL Garaya and the VMAC RD series, were the logical conclusion of the tuner series selling their wares philosophy that characterized early GT300. While the first two were based on road cars that barely sold any, the Shiden's purpose-built origins were covered in greater detail a few minutes ago. What Mooncraft did with the Daytona prototype can be seen as Mooncraft advertising its engineering prowess, since the company did occasionally make body kits for street cars. Mooncraft just went a step forward and made one for the race car, in a similar vein to what it did for Formula 2 chassis to create the most successful Grand Champion machines. GT3 arriving on the GT300 scene will change the landscape of the class from the aforementioned tuners to one based on teams and drivers. I will cover the steady decline in JAF GT300 cars as I cover the Shiden's racing exploits. The Shiden will be ready for the first race of the 2006 season at Suzuka Circuit. A fast, glowing technical track with a unique figure 8 layout, the Shiden's superior aerodynamics compared to its competitors should give the car a leg up on them. Furthermore, the Shiden had a shakedown at the same circuit earlier in the year, so Team Tokai Dream 28 should have a little bit of Shiden-specific extra data. Testing is no substitute for race mileage, and the Japanese racing world anxiously looked at the new machine to gauge its performance potential. Would it obliterate the field? The Shiden's first qualifying session will be held in mixed conditions, with the drying track on the first Friday session. Its first few laps were surprisingly slow, as the team scrambled to set up the car properly for the cold and moist Suzuka before Hiroki Kato set the fastest lap of the session in the closing stages. This performance set them up nicely for Saturday's top 10 shootout, where the Shiden would end up 5th on the grid. Or they would have been 5th, had the team not discovered the fuel tank link in warm-up. Therefore, the Shiden's inaugural race start would be from the unideal pit lane position. Luckily for the Shiden, no further fuel issues were plagued at Suzuka, and the bright blue prototype steadily worked its way to the GT300 field. The car would be 18th place out of 23 by the first pit stop, but Takahashi went off course, extending his stint by a lap and undoing all his hard work. Kato would make up for the minor off and then some, powering the Shiden up to 6th place by the end of the race. Despite the minor hiccups, the future looked pretty bright for the brand new machine. The Shiden's next outing would be at Okayama. This is a medium-speed track with 2 sizable straightaways and a couple of hairpins. Most iRacing subscribers should be pretty familiar with it, since it's one of the precious few free tracks included with the game. Anyway, the Shiden's bright future will be theoretically dimmed with the addition of 2 types of extra weight. The first category of extra weight is the aforementioned success ballast supplied to high-placing cars after each race in Super GT. This prevents runaway winners theoretically and keeps the racing close. The 6th place in Suzuka saddled it with 10 kilograms of this type of ballast. Another 50 kilograms of ballast will come from the series organizers themselves, as they feared such a radical car to run away with the whole season. From here on out, I'll just cover the season the car raced in as a whole, rather than give a play-by-play of every race. The Shiden had a far longer lifespan than anything that's raced on the channel so far, so I want to avoid having the video drag on for no reason. Ironic. Coming from the guy who made a 28-minute video on a car that had yet to turn a wheel in competition at the time, and the 77-minute behemoth on a comic book Costumus. Anyway, the Okayama race went a bit less smoothly for the new machine. Qualifying a solid 8th place, the car was quickly overtaken thanks to its lack of straight line speed, as the car ran a high downforce setup. It ran around 10th place until the end of the race, when it attempted to overtake an MRS and pushed it off track. The Shiden will receive a 27-second time penalty for that, leaving it out on the points in 11th place. Team Tokai Dream 28 would bounce back in Fuji after tweaking the car's aerodynamics a bit. A valiant effort by Hiroki Kato netted the Shiden its first pole position. The Golden Week pole would translate into a 4th place for the team, showing the car's high potential despite its nerfs. The Shiden would go back-to-back on pole positions at Sepang as well, but the car will be bested by the RE Amemiya RX-7, a 2-frame special powered by a 3-rotor engine. The Shiden would end up 1 place behind the podium at Sepang, but would improve on that position by 1 at Sugo, marking the Shiden's maiden podium. The Shiden would have to wait a couple more races for its maiden victory at Autopolis. At the Torsey track in Kyushu, the Shiden would earn its 3rd pole position of the entire season, an impressive feat considering the ballast the car had to run. The car also set the fastest lap of the race and never let go of the lead outside of pit cycling. This performance put the Shiden at the top of the points leaderboard with 1 race to go. The final race at Fuji will be a chance for the Shiden to achieve a maiden championship, unless something catastrophic happened. As the Shiden's main weakness was its low acceleration off corner exits, cars Tokai Dream 28 experimented with wheel covers to reduce the car's drag and increase max speed at the end of the straights. This wasn't enough to offset the car's now 1,300 kilogram mass, so the team settled for 13th on the grid. All the Shiden had to do was finish ahead of the RX-7 and the BMAC, which were 2nd and 3rd in point standings. Unfortunately, the former car qualified ahead of it. During the race proper, the Shiden steadily made its way up the field thanks to spirited driving from Kato and the RX-7 spinning. Kato handed the Shiden to Takahashi in 6th place. Thanks to excessive tire wear leading to car balance issues, Takahashi struggled to keep the lofty grid position Kato left the car in. Furthermore, the RE Amemiya RX-7 was steadily gaining. It would eventually overtake Takahashi, finishing 7th. Despite this, the points lead wasn't enough to let the Shiden take the championship if they had scored a point, which it didn't, as Takahashi was overtaking on the final lap, leaving him 11th. The Shiden and RX-7 were tied on points, leading to the rotary machine to take the championship on countback. The Shiden's main championship position would match its number, 2nd. 2007 brought an obvious desire to win the championship the team had been so close to claiming the first time out. So what changed externally on the Shiden? Not much, if anything. The shock absorbers were easier to adjust, and the Yokohama developed the tires more, though the latter thing applied to everyone using their rubber. The engine grew in capacity by about 200 cc. Claimed power will remain at about 350 horsepower. A newly mandated skid plate would now sit underneath the flat bottom, reducing its efficiency. Luckily for the Shiden, this wasn't just a screw to Shiden in particular change, but one that the entire field had to suffer from. 29 cars were entered into the 2007 GT300 field. Like 2006, this was peak regional racing series grid. The Shiden had 7 competitors in the small volume sports car class alone. Although slightly over half the grid was made up of foreign cars, these were all independently developed machines, even the Porsche 911 GT3s. The 2007 season would feature the same exact circuits in the same order as last year. Would the Shiden's results be deja vu? I've just been in this place before. I've seen the future into the present, and the Shiden's final driver championship position will match its car number yet again. The team's championship did go the Shiden's way on the other hand. The car would take 4 podiums, standing on the top step at the Suzuka 1000 kilometers. This race was the crown jewel and longest race of the Super GT calendar, with running times of about 6 hours. Despite burning up a wiring element in practice, the car would take pole position and would go on to take victory in dominant fashion, despite changing conditions from humid and hot to rainy. Then the car would also go on to take points for fastest lap. Truly a perfect race. 2008, the year the global economy took a big hit. Not big enough to hurt her favorite Japanese racing series, for now. What did get hurt, however, was performance of the GT300 category. All cars were fitted with narrow restrictors to make passing easier for the GT500s. The Shiden would have to run with a 23.6mm device, basically 3D stroll size. This exacerbated the Shiden's main weakness of lacking power off corner exits, since it ran one of the tiniest restrictors in the category. The weight-balanced proto-BOP also made a return for this year, and the Shiden, along with the other purpose-built cars like the Guraya, was one of the usual victims. At least Takahashi was improving his driving skills. The 2008 season would be the Shiden's first winless season, though not from a lack of competitiveness, as the car was still capable of scoring pole positions. Suzuka was the first race of the season, as it's been for the past couple of years. It's also a circuit that the car traditionally performs quite strongly, so Kato would dutifully put the car on pole like he has done a few times over the past couple of years. Unfortunately, the RE Amemiya RX-7 would overtake the Shiden for race lead, and the Shiden would have to settle for a finish matching its racing number. 2 other podiums would lead to the Shiden finishing 4th in point standings. This season would also mark the Shiden's first retirement, at the Suzuka 1000 kilometers, thanks to complications from a collision with the J-Lock Lamborghini. 2009 would mark the global debut of the first true GT3 race car, the Audi R8 LMS. Unlike its competition at the time, the R8 LMS was purpose-built for GT3 by manufacturer instead of being a glorified cup car or primarily developed by a privateer. Like our protagonist, it was a mid-engine, 2-frame race car designed to be easy to drive for the gentleman drivers intended to finance and drive the thing. Unlike our protagonist, anyone could buy one, it came with real customer support, you could race it anywhere, and everyone recognized the badge on the front. The car made a big splash in Europe, but the shockwaves took a while to reach Japan. The GT300 field was still largely made up of self-developed race cars, even the Ford ones. The only exceptions to that rule were the Disparate Z4, the Daishin F430, and a couple of Porsche 911 GT3s. Prototype cars like the Shiden were becoming an endangered species, with only 3 other ones running this season. Enough about its competition. Let's get back to talking about the Shiden. GTA got spooked by the impressive quartering speeds achieved by Super GT machines in both classes, so front dive flames were banned across the board. In an attempt to claw back a little of the front downforce lost, the louvers mentioned a few sections ago was found on the interface of the front fenders. The rear wing's end plates would also shrink from the full-length devices seen on the initial car to the medium-length ones with a small notch cut up top. The car's handling characteristics would go from dull and predictable to more peaky and setup dependent. Now let's get to the 10th of the elephant in the room, as that's the amount of ballast the car would run compared to the original race weight of 1100 kilograms. The Shiden would start the season at 1225 kilograms and would only get heavier as the season went on, provided that they performed well. At least its restrictor was 0.1 millimeters larger. Takuya Yoshimoto would also replace Kazuho Takahashi as the car's second driver, since the latter wanted to focus more on running the team. This season would be one of ups and downs for our blue protagonist. Despite occupying every position on the podium, the final 2 races of the season were marred by mechanical issues, causing him to finish last after performing strongly beforehand. The Shiden's sole victory this season would be Sepang. 2010 was another season where the Shiden weighed more than its design weight and took a singular victory. This would be the last victory of its career. One notable event this season was 7th round being cancelled thanks to a typhoon, Japan and its natural disasters. The Suzuka 1000 kilometers would also be cut down to merely 700 kilometers, and the car retired that race too. Hiroshi Hamaguchi also replaced Takuya Yoshimoto as second driver. The Shiden's competition was pretty similar to the prior years, with a good chunk of the grid being made up of Porsches. Only 3 other Japanese-built meme cars would participate, not counting the Mosler, even though it shares the same spirit. This would be the last year that Japanese-built cars would make up a majority of the grid. Anyway, on to the final victory. This would be a pole to win affair at the technical Sugo circuit, the brightest spot and an uncharacteristically unlucky season for the team. The subprime lending crisis was hitting every sector of the economy quite hard. Hard to the point of the team having to take on a new title sponsor. Hideaki Anno's blockbuster hit anime, Neon Genesis Evangelion, had license deals encompassing all sorts of consumer products. It wouldn't be a stretch to see a race car in colors related to said anime. A deal was struck to paint the Shiden in the green and purple tank stock of the EVA 01 mech the anime's protagonist Shinji reluctantly piloted. Takahashi and Kado were reprised the role as drivers. Despite the new paint job, performance slowed as teams began to enter the new crop of GT3 cars. 2011 featured 17 foreign-born machines in total, the majority being FIA GT spec cars. Only 4 Japanese prototype cars remain, being the Shiden, the Garaya, and 2 VMAX. 2011 will be the Shiden's worst performance yet, finishing 10th in the overall standings with only a single podium. 2012, the year the world was supposed to end, or so people sensationalized an ancient Mayan calendar thought. What would end this year was the Shiden's competitive career. 2013 would ban the low-production sports cars from the GT300 category, leaving GT300 for cars that more than 20 people bought. Therefore, only 3 limited production cars contested this season, the lowest number ever. Still clad in their resplendent green and purple EVA 01 unit, the Shiden's age started to show as the newer FIA spec cars encroached on the field's makeup even more. Why develop your own car out of the domestic market's slim pickings at the time when you could buy an Aston Martin or BMW and get real customer support without having to deal with Ferrari prices and attitude and the quirky characteristics of the Porsche 911? 18 of the 28 cars entered into the GT300 class of 2012 were FIA GT spec cars. 4 were Audi R8s alone. How well would the aging Shiden, a car seeing little development compared to its homegrown peers, dare against the foreign onslaught in its final season of competition? In a word, poorly. The Shiden did not have a fairy tale farewell season. The highlight to the poop Sunday of a season that ran was a second place finish during the Golden Week Fuji race. Besides that, it was either buried in the midfield or didn't finish. It even failed to start at Sepang, a circuit it historically performed fairly well at. After the shambolic 2012 season, the Shiden ran one final race at Fuji Speedway, the non-championship Fuji All-Star race. Befitting the number on its side and amount of runner-up championship finishes that Shiden enjoyed over his career, it finished second. Since I neglected to go into enough detail about the Shiden's performance over his career, I might as well compare qualifying time at Suzuka over 7 years competition in a separate section, just to show y'all how much the car's performance has improved over time and the effects of regulation changes. In 2006, the car qualified with 203. This is before the extra handicap weight or any regulation changes to hobble the cars. For reference, this is about as fast as the SRO Spec GT3s that ran in the 2025 Japan Cup. 2007 brought a slightly larger engine to combat whatever GTA would do with the restrictors. The extra 200cc and revised suspension geometry kept the car in more or less the same place pace-wise. 2008's restrictor nerf added 2 seconds to the Shiden's qualifying time with a 205. Surprisingly, the loss of the front dive planes and extra weight didn't hurt the car's 2009 pace compared to the previous year. The 2010 slight form slump was evident in the qualifying time, a second slower than the prior year's time, though this was the first year the Suzuka 300 kilometers wasn't the season opener. Therefore, the car ran a few extra kilos of excess ballast in addition to the extra regulatory mass. Its qualifying pace remained about the same in 2011. For the 2012 season, the Shiden was allowed to run with larger restrictors to help it keep up with the new GT3 cars. This led to the car going about as fast as it did in 2006, qualifying with a 203. From this, you can see the effects of the GTA reducing the cornering speeds of the cars over the years. The Shiden seemed to be affected more of a power loss than anything in its qualifying times, implying that it was strongest in its cornering performance. Period race reports mention the Shiden's lack of power off corner exits, which is balanced out by its high max speeds at the end of straights and strong fuel economy. Therefore, the Shiden appeared to be a momentum car relying heavily on keeping a good rhythm to the corners, rather than brute power. These traits honestly remind me of F-Zero's Fire Stingray in that at corner swell it had a high max speed, but poor acceleration, which mandates clean driving. In addition, it has the Wild Goose or Black Bull's hit-taking capabilities thanks to the impact structures inherited from its previous life. Back to the car itself, I think the Shiden could still be competitive today if it were allowed to run unrestricted and at its original design weight. Tire technology has improved greatly in the past decade, plus the 1UZ clearly has a lot of overhead or extra power. The latest engines were used in Grand Am's GT500, easily making over 500 horsepower. Modern GT3s make about that much anyway. Since the Shiden was so overbuilt compared to its inferior performance level, the car could handle the extra power and grip without extra reinforcement, though the wider tires of today's GT300s may or may not physically fit the car that well. The Shiden was intended to enjoy an active retirement for Super GT competition. Takuya Yura intended to sell it off to someone who wanted to race it somewhere, like a full season in the Asian Le Mans series, or even serve as a special guest in the Grand Am sports car series it originated in. No takers. He also had thoughts of converting the machine to a road car, but his hands grew full again with a new project, the mother chassis Lotus Evora. The GTA noticed to tie the foreign turnkey car taking over the Japanese series, so they commissioned Dome to build a cheap carbon chassis that could accept custom bodywork. The chassis could work in front or mid-engine layouts, and the Lotus Evora was obviously the latter. The mother chassis Evora can be seen as the successor to the Shiden project, being run by the same team and using the same drivers. It would not enjoy the same level of success as its predecessor, as the Pro-Am driver level and Lotus level reliability kept the car from being competitive as it could have been. The Shiden itself rested Mooncraft, having only seen the light of day a few times since its retirement. With that, the story of the Shidens, both old and new, comes to a close. While the original car blazed trails as an independent Japanese race car constructor despite a lack of on-track success, the modern car bearing its namesake enjoyed a long and fruitful career, representing the logical conclusion of a fairly open GT car class. That is, a purpose-built race car shoehorned to fit within the performance window. Subscribe if you want to hear more about vintage fishes and sports car racing. This is Synodontis Man signing off. Adios.